All right, everyone, welcome in to a brand new episode of Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports. My name is Nicholas Hill, live here from Chattanooga, Tennessee of the United States of America. And joining me, as always, from Americana, Sao Paulo, Brazil, is Gustavo Tomazeli. Obviously, we have a lot to discuss this week. It's been a busy couple of days sports-wise here in America. It's always busy sports-wise in America, but especially if you're a college football fan, it has been absolutely insane. Gus, how are things down there in Brazil?
Things have been busy too. Of course, on Saturday, the biggest game of the season happened. And, I've been talking for quite a bit of time. And I mean, it was huge. It has repercussions from, until today. And we're definitely going to talk about it. And, it's busy too. It's almost the end of the season here for soccer.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get down into that Libertadores final and the ramifications that result had. But the opening topic we're going to talk about, and it is a very timely topic for us to discuss. And we wanted to discuss this in the wake of some things that have been going on in the sports world. Loyalty in the sports world. It's kind of a broad topic, and there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. And I'm really curious to see what the differences are between the U.S. and in Brazil in terms of how much loyalty means to fans, to clubs, and just to the country as a whole. Because it seems like when it comes to American sports at this time, loyalty is valued at a premium, but no one actually seems to be practicing it. It's just an absolutely weird place where you've gotten to with loyalty that, if you have to make your own individual decision to make more money, then loyalty no longer matters.
Yeah, I mean that's what happens in Brazil too. I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy in terms of that topic. Like, of course, fans want the coaches to be loyal and don't leave your club, but as soon as the club starts not doing good in the season, they're ready to can you. They're ready to fire you. So it's a very, it's an interesting thing in Brazil as well because there has a brand new rule that has a lot of ramification in terms of keeping, for example, coaches. So loyalty is the kind of thing everybody wants other people to have it, but in the end you always want the result right now.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone wants to win. And no matter how much people may like a person, if they're not delivering the results, you're going to move on to find someone else. But this is not necessarily what's brought upon this topic is not necessarily people getting fired. It's people leaving their current jobs for other ones, which I think in just general in life, I think, it's a good thing. We talk about, just the free market in general, right? It's a competition. You're always competing against someone in order to come out on top, to have better results. And that, to me, it creates a healthier economy, a healthier society. But when you have such emotional attachment to sports teams, it definitely can feel like a stab in the back when a coach, for example, decides, that their job isn't good enough anymore and they have to go find another one. And an opportunity comes along to take to further their career and to perhaps put themselves in a better position. Now, we don't chastise, a stockbroker, for example, moving from one hedge fund to the other because that hedge fund job is not really, at least consciously, affecting a lot of people. Now, obviously, hedge funds
But
can
there's
do
no
affect a lot
emotional
of people.
connection. I think there's a lot of emotional connection.
I mean, it's emotional connection to money, but it's
Yeah.
more of a practical emotional connection. Like sports, if you think about it, really aren't practical. Like it's not practical for us to watch football all weekend, but we do because we love it and we want to. Um, so that's why there's such fear at Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly right now for the decisions that they've made. And we'll break down what we think of those hires a little bit later in the show. But this is just more about the general idea of loyalty. Is it unfair to heavily criticize these coaches for making these decisions? Because, in every other profession, if, for example, as a, directors, Steven Spielberg, he could go and direct a small indie house film with no funding, you know, and make technically a better product. But at the same time, he can go work with like Paramount Pictures and make a big budget movie. They may not be as good, but he's still making a lot more money in the long run. Do we fault Steven Spielberg in that example for taking that job? No. So should we really fault Riley and Kelly and other coaches that have taken those jobs, taken a better job for going after those?
It's an interesting question. Let me give a shout out to my sponsor on my Brazilian radio show, Ivo Cordeiro. He's a great realtor, great person. Samuel dos Santos watching as well. Um, but I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's unfair to think that you want to advance your career, because at the same time, like in Brazil, the reality, I think, the other way around. Like, clubs are ready to fire you, even if the confederation, the entity that rules Brazilian soccer, creates a rule that, oh, you can only fire the coach once in the season. But then they create this, rule. Oh, but it's like a common agreement, like you both parties agreed to, cut ties, then it's okay. So the season has a lot of common fires, like, we commonly agree to part ways. There's a lot of decisions like that because they create a rule. But at the end of the day, coaches are professionals that should advance their careers and want to have a better job. Like, and about expectations as well, because a lot of times coaches are surrounded by expectations. I bet Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly are going to come with a lot of expectations to deliver both at USC and LSU. That happened in Brazil as well. When Renato Gaúcho was fired from Grêmio, everybody assumed he was going to take the Flamengo job because Flamengo wanted him to be the coach for years, but he always refused because he had loyalty to Grêmio, loyalty to where he stayed. He stayed there for 5 years, which is a really long time for a coach in Brazil to be in the same job. But at the same time, he went there with a lot of expectations, and and I'm gonna get to that point later. He was fired after losing the Libertadores final because he didn't deliver. He left with a lot of hate. So it's about expectations, and fans are never understand the desires of the careers because they see the coach as like a part of their team. So they don't want the commander in chief of the team to leave.
Yeah, and that's certainly a lot of interesting things to think about because you do have to balance that emotional uh, attachment to the expectations. And you're right about Riley and Kelly. The expectations they're going to have are astronomical. And we're going to talk about what those expectations are for those teams because LSU and USC are programs that expect championships, and they expect a lot of them, both conference and national championships. And you can only do so much with press conferences. You can only do so much with your fan promotions and everything else because ultimately it's all about winning. It's all about relative to what you've done. Like, for example, I think about like Rick Barnes at Tennessee, a Tennessee basketball coach. Tennessee basketball historically has not been great. I mean, we've never made a Final Four. So Rick Barnes consistently being a good coach, having top tier seasons, having top 20 teams, making it to the second weekend, that's good enough for Tennessee to stave off any desire to fire him, at least for the meantime. But if he had his resume at Kentucky or UCLA, I don't know if those fan bases would be as kind and would still want to keep him around. It's all definitely so. Loyalty is only as earned as the fan expectation is. Like, just look at Tennessee football. I mean, Butch Jones, had back-to-back 9-4 seasons, decent seasons, but relative to expectations, they were disappointments. Because in 2016, we were preseason ranked number 9. People thought we were going to win the East, that Tennessee was going to contend for a playoff spot. Didn't happen. They still beat Florida and Georgia, but that's not enough. Not enough at Tennessee because Tennessee expects to be in competition for conference and national championships. Of course, Tennessee hasn't done either one of those things since 1998. But still, the fan mentality is we're going to compete for championships. Although I do think in some respects that has calmed down a bit over time just because we've had to come to grips with the fact that Alabama and Georgia are probably the two best programs in the country right now. So it's really hard to overcome that and the damage that Jeremy Pruitt did to the Tennessee football program.
And also, you talk about expectations with fans, with their coaches, like, and that's gonna be, I'm gonna give a little spoiler about my hot take, but Silvinho, current Corinthians head coach, he came in mid-season. The expectations were low because the team was a rebuilding team with a lot of young players, a lot of players that, and some old players that have not been playing well for the past few years. So the team was okay, was like, 10th, 11th, 12th place, in the 20, in the Brazilian, it was in the mid table. So then Corinthians brought 5 star players, 5 really good players, and they are in 4th position. They're good. They're as good as it gets. If you tell Corinthians fans, like, 5 months ago, Corinthians will be, qualifying for Libertadores, 4th place, you'll be like, oh my God, that's amazing. But Corinthians fans still don't trust Silvinho because he has not been playing well on the road, winning home game. He's winning home games. So the fans are questioning him, and he was a very good player at Corinthians. He won a lot of national and international titles with Corinthians. He has an identity to the team, and I think he's doing a good job because he had a squad, a roster with a lot of young players and unproven players, and then he got really good players all at once to make it work. So I think I think that this kind of loyalty is an expectations. I think it's so much, because Corinthians fans should be loyal to Silvinho. He was a really good former player, and he's doing really good compared to like last season Corinthians that almost was relegated, but the fans still wanted more.
Right, and then we do have a comment here. It's I don't know how to read Hebrew, so I apologize for not knowing your name. But this person's saying, I'm very disappointed with FIFA. Lionel Messi won the Golden Ball as last year's best footballer in the world and does not deserve it.
I mean,
Robert Lewandowski deserves to win it. I'm going to be honest
talk
with
about
you.
talk about loyalty. FIFA and France Football Magazine, they are loyal to Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi because those are the only 2 players who wins any awards in soccer. So talk about loyalty. I think those 2 players, all they're FIFA and France Football, they're very loyal to Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, even though they're not as good as like 5 years ago.
Yeah, and it's really weird because you think about, like, for example, the NBA. Like, LeBron James could have 10 MVPs. Like, he just could. He's the most valuable player in the league for over a decade. But they don't give him the award every single year because that would get bored and get stale. The same thing applied to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan probably should have won MVP like 10 straight years in a row in the late 80s and 90s. Didn't win it because they don't like to give the same player MVP every single year. So I don't understand when it comes to the Ballon d'Or and the Golden Ball, why other players don't get a crack at it. Because I understand Lionel Messi and Ronaldo have been the best players for a decade. But there are other class talents out there.
Oh yeah, Lewandowski has been the best forward for a very long time. It's just Messi and Ronaldo are probably the most 2 recognizable players in the world still.
Yeah.
Neymar should have been to that spot, but he unfortunately has not won titles or been the star the PSG thought he would. So I think Neymar should have been, kind of on the same level, but he's still not. He's still kind of on the second level still. Mbappe should be also considered that. He has been a French star, won the FIFA World Cup, won dominated at PSG, but I think still a lot of media, surrounding Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo helps them to get those awards, and so the loyalty
Yeah. So
also.
a question. I do, I do have a question for you when it comes to Neymar in that conversation and why he isn't on the Ronaldo and Messi level. How much do you think him getting hurt in the 2014 FIFA World Cup in that quarterfinal, and I believe it was against Colombia, because
Yes,
they barely
Colombia.
won that game,
Oh,
and
Zuniga.
then he doesn't get to play, and he doesn't play in the semifinal game against Germany where they get ran out of the stadium. How much of that do you think hurts
I don't.
Neymar's
No,
reputation?
no, I don't think it hurt at all. I mean, he got injured badly by which I still think at the
Well, what I'm
time he
saying is
was.
he missed a chance to. I mean, because like if Neymar's on that field against Germany, like maybe things turn out. I don't know if they win, but I don't think they get ran out of the stadium with Neymar.
Yeah, I
And,
think if Neymar would have played that game, things probably could have been harder because he was having a good World Cup. He was been the star of that team.
yeah,
But in terms of he been, I think he went to PSG for that. He went to PSG to be the star in a very rich and upcoming European superpower that thought would win by now at least one Champions League. They made it to one Champions League final and they lost to Bayern Munich in the COVID bubble version of the UEFA Champions League. So I think, and I also question the decision of him leaving Barcelona. I know he wanted to be the star in the main star in a big, rich soccer club, but I think Barcelona still has more recognition, even though they're financially in turmoil. But in terms of, see, another point about loyalty, Neymar wasn't loyal to a brand like Barcelona. He tried to go to PSG, which is still as not as big brand in European soccer as Barcelona, and he still probably did not get the recognition that he expected.
yeah. I mean, would you say like the lack of a cap at anywhere in professional soccer causes that? Like Ronaldo could have stayed with Manchester United and helped them run your English soccer for a decade, but he went to Real Madrid, and now he's at Juventus, and
And now he's back.
yeah, now he's back. But I mean, he's still great, but I mean, I don't think he's exactly where he was at his peak.
I think he went to Real Madrid for the same reason LeBron James went to Miami. He wanted to play with the best players. He wanted to win titles, and he won a bunch of them. I mean, he won 3 out of 4 Champions League in a 4-season period. So I mean, that's really impressive in terms of titles. I mean, Messi also won a lot of, probably one less title, but he had more a bet like he had the best he has the best offense I have ever seen soccer. The MSN trio, Messi, Suarez, and Neymar, that was probably the best offense in this century. But at the end, you choose what is best for your career. Going back to loyalty, Neymar had a really great financial opportunity. He was going to be the most paid player in the world. He's going to be the star in a club that is located in Paris, so it's still a very important city in Europe. So he didn't thought about loyalty. And even coming back to Brazil, he left Santos in 2013. Fans thought he at least was going to stay until the World Cup. He was going to play for Santos at least one more season, and then he abruptly left. In the mid-season of the Brazilian mid-season Brazil, but the beginning of the 2013-2014 season for European for Barcelona, and it was a lot of turmoil because fans feel betrayed.
Yeah, and actually, kind of a question there about Brazil I would like to ask, because obviously, you think about from international stage. I can only name a handful of cities in Brazil. You got Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, um, you know, Brasilia. I know Americana. So some of those bigger cities, especially Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo. How much do like the smaller cities like an Americana have to fight those cities with their soccer clubs when it comes to that best talent? And
I
how do
think
you think it
I
compares
think
to like college football and what we
I
have here in
think
the U.S.?
I think unfortunately, like Rio Branco, unfortunately, they can't compete to get the good players anymore. Probably in the 90s, players would come to Rio Branco to get shown to the biggest stage. Rio Branco was probably the only team in the world who had 3 soccer players that started in their academy or started playing professionally in Rio Branco playing a World Cup in 2006 that all started in the mid 90s. But that doesn't happen anymore because the way soccer is structured right now, there's a big gap between the rich big teams and the small teams who fight for survival. And so and I even go to like cities like Americana, compare like Rio and Sao Paulo have the most attractive media, the biggest, sports media. But you have like cities like Porto Alegre, Curitiba in the south, who doesn't get more attention, but their teams are still winning tournaments. Like Grêmio won the Libertadores 2017, Atlético Paranaense won the Brazilian Cup, and 2 times Copa Sul-Americana, which is like a South America second division 2 times. So those teams are being good, but they're still not the great level, making to a, Brazilian national championship year in, year out. But Rio is still, I think Flamengo's carrying a lot of Rio because if you think about it, this season, 4 like Rio has really 4 big teams like Flamengo, Botafogo, Vasco, and Fluminense. 2 out of those 4 teams were in the second division. It's crazy to think about it. But even a big city as Rio and the teams that have millions of fans still ended up in the second division. And a team like Bragantino in a small, not like a relative midtown in the state of Sao Paulo is doing really well in the first division because it's about the mentality of how you run your team. And again, going back to loyalty, a lot of small teams and even bigger teams have loyalty to the traditions of the way it has been done. Like you have the council, you have the president, you have to keep things doing the same way even though it's not working anymore. That's archaic, that doesn't work anymore. And then you have fans leaving your club saying, I'm not going to root for you anymore because you don't win, you don't care, alienate fans. So in Brazil, there's a lot of exodus. Rio Branco Stadium used to be filled up in the 90s. Now with 10, 12, 15,000 fans. Now, if we get 1,000 fans, that's, oh my God, it's amazing. Like, but now it's like 400, 500 fans. Like, so because those fans left the team because they are not loyal. They are loyal because in Brazil, people are they like to win. They root for your team to win. They don't like to lose.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into like the last part of this loyalty discussion I want to get into is how much loyalty should fans have ultimately? Because I think that's a big part of pride, Like, oh, I've been a fan of the Vols since I've been a little kid. I'm going to be a fan of them until I die. That's kind of the mentality that most sports fans have when it comes to their respective teams. But, we have to remember, expectations are a two-way street, I feel like. And it feels like, if the organization or team isn't giving you what you want them to give you, then how much really should you owe them? Like I think about like the Detroit Lions, for example. Someone born in, I believe, let's just say 1980, has seen the Detroit Lions win one playoff game. Someone who's my age and is a Lions fan has never seen them win a playoff game and has barely seen them in the playoffs at all, even though they literally had Matthew Stafford for over a decade, couldn't do anything with them. And now they're just abjectly a disaster, and I don't know how they rebuild over the next 2-3 years. I feel like someone in that position would be excused to go find another team. I understand there's the idea of being loyal or whatever, but you do have to remember at the end of the day, the GM, the owners, really deep down don't know who you are. They don't. But I mean, they say they can care about the fan base, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But they aren't going to know if you as an individual decide to switch a team alliance. And
it is interesting about that because in America, team alliance is connected to your city because you ended up rooting for the Detroit Lions because you're born in the Metro Detroit area or the surrounding cities. In Brazil, it's even more complicated because the big cities like Detroit, they normally have 2 teams to pick. Like Sao Paulo and Rio have 4. Porto Alegre has 2. Curitiba has 2. Minas Gerais has 2. Even cities on the Northeast who are not large, but they have a significant population, have like 2 or 3 teams to pick. So the competition is large. So, you ended up picking a side. You normally don't leave because you always want it to be your rival. But of course, people left when your club's not winning consistently in this recent day and age. Like Botafogo, who just was, just this weekend got the trophy for the second division. I was there. It was a beautiful party, 40,000 fans making a party. It was amazing party. The Botafogo fans, but in the overall picture, the Botafogo fan base is decreasing year by year because the new people who are enjoying soccer are not rooting for Botafogo, because Botafogo in this century has been relegated 3 times and never came close to win not a Brazilian national championship, not a Brazilian cup, not a Libertadores, not only the state tournament they won. So they ended up rooting for Flamengo, who has been really successful in the past 2 decades. Fluminense has been successful in the past 2 decades. So the older fan base stays. Do you think that happened in America too? Like the example, the Lions?
Yeah, I see that happening on an SEC level, because I think when you look at the older fan bases, like in SEC, for example, it's really heavily connected to where you were born. Like most people in Tennessee used to be Tennessee fans. Most people in Alabama used to be just straight up Alabama fans. Or, your geography determined who you rooted for. But I think amongst all the younger generation who may have not seen a team like Tennessee be very good, you're seeing more and more them going to different teams like a Georgia or an Alabama, teams they can see having a lot of success. And I feel like geographic loyalty means a lot less than it used to. And I just feel like in the NFL too, because you have to remember too, I think one of the factors is, before 1990, cable television really wasn't widespread. Like, I believe my parents told me they got cable TV around 90, 91. I know some people had it in the 80s. But before then, you clearly just couldn't watch any game. You had 3 to 4 channels on your television, and you got what you got. And most of the time, it was the teams in your region that you were able to go and watch. And I think going from that era where there was so little, and frankly, most people listen to their games. Like, I've heard stories about how my grandpa preferred to listen to a baseball game over watch it. And of course, they would listen to the Atlanta Braves because that's the team that they got here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And now you can watch any team. Like, for example, I know my roommate in college, a shout out to Nick Swanson if he's watching here. Sometimes we'd watch the Oakland A's in Knoxville, Tennessee, because he had a national MLB subscription thing, and you could watch any MLB game in the country that you wanted, regardless of geography. You weren't limited to just the Braves or the Cincinnati Reds, which was the secondary market team for Knoxville. I think that's part of it. You can watch any team you want. In college football, you can watch any game. You can watch the Big Ten Network all day if you want to, and never step foot in the Midwest. So that's, I think, a big part of it. Just the access to the product has completely changed. I don't know if it's changed like that in Brazil also.
Yeah.
But,
In Brazil,
yeah.
like for example, Flamengo fan base grew a lot from the mid 70s to early 90s because people had access to the normal cable, the antenna channels, and normally those channels were broadcast games for Flamengo. Flamengo's winning consistently, so I believe that people ended up being loyal to watching a team winning consistently and always being on TV. That's why Flamengo has 40 million fans spread to all Brazil. Of course, they're not like only fans to Flamengo. A lot of those are fans of a regional team, but oh, I like Flamengo too because I watch them on TV. So, but in Brazil we can access, but still cable and even streaming has come strong. I think leagues are embracing streaming, but the general population still are tied to their main antenna TV and the radio station and the state kind of team they pick, So
It sounds like we all are about 5 to 10 years behind where we are in terms of
yes.
streaming stuff. So by the end of this decade, I imagine you're all going to be pretty much where we are in terms of streaming. And at this point, I feel like I've watched, for example, the basketball teams, like the Lady Vols. Pretty much all their games have been streaming this year. So ESPN, I know after this, I'll go and watch them play on ESPN Plus tonight. Uh, it's just the wave of the future. It's the way it's been. Of course, we've talked about that ad nauseum in the past, but I think that does have a big part in determining what you can and cannot be a fan of. So, kind of one last thing I want to bring up teams that leave. So, like, you can't. So, I think most people would agree you can't fault someone from like St. Louis no longer being a Rams fan because the Rams moved to Los Angeles, or someone from San Diego decide not to follow the Chargers to Los Angeles. Um, but is that necessarily fair? Like, if you were, for example, like, when we talk about Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley, if you're a fan of those individual coaches, like, would it be okay to say, all right, I was an Oklahoma fan, but now I'm going to root for the Trojans because Lincoln Riley's my favorite coach? I don't know if those really add up together, but what do you think about that analogy?
I mean, I mean, in Brazil, teams, I only remember few cases, mostly in like mid to small state teams who moved to city. Like if one of the big cases were Guaratinguetá in 2009, they were being successful. They went to the semifinals of the Paulista Championship. They were in the second division nationally. They're doing good. They were doing a good job. And then the businessmen who are kind of running the team decided to pull the team from the city and bring to Americana. The team came to Americana, Sao Paulo, and they played, I believe it was only one season, was only 2011. But people in the city did not embrace the team. People still rejected, even though even though this Guaratinguetá, who became Americana football team, was way more successful than Rio Branco. It was in the second division nationally, first division in the state. Could have been this new opportunity for Americana to have this new team with new aspiration. The fans still kept to their old team, who were back then were in the third division in the state. So it's so crazy to think about loyalty. Fans ended up rooting for a team that is worse but has been around forever than a team who just arrived, like, it arrives, one day, or arrives recently and is in a better position. But fans there not going to agree. Another thing that is about loyalty, for example, Bragantino was a very traditional soccer team in the state of São Paulo. They won the Paulista Championship. They went to the Brazilian final in 1991. And recently they were purchased by Red Bull, the energy company. And then they're doing well. They just went to a Sul-Americana final. They're in the top 10 in the Brazilian league. And the fans seem to like that. I've been to 2 games of Bragantino, now Red Bull Bragantino, and the fans seem to enjoy it. Fans seem to root for the team. But the more traditionalist soccer fans hate that idea because it says it kills the roots. It kind of makes soccer more corporate. I don't think so. I think at the end fans want to win. They don't care if Red Bull Bragantino or Energy or Monster Energy Bragantino. They care that Bragantino, the Bragança Paulista team, is winning.
Yeah, that's a really interesting case of a team trying to go into a new market that is just not embracing it. It kind of reminds me of the Los Angeles Chargers. It's just how they really haven't been embraced in LA. Like, you look at the home games, it's mostly opposing teams, opposing fans that show up to those games. So, moving where the grass is greener isn't always the best deal, because sometimes your best position is to be where you were. And I feel like we don't embrace that enough in society because we're always told, you've got to go out, you got to go for the next job, the next opportunity. You should never say no. Sometimes you should. And when you should is murky, but people perhaps don't say no as much as they should.
But in Brazil, the 3 teams that I remember that moved to one city to the other, they all ended up disasters. It was the same script. They were really good. What in the market level, they could have been like, they were in the first division or in the first division or second division nationally, first division in the state. They were doing good, but they had problems with the local government, so they moved to different cities. But those cities did not embrace them, and ended up coming back to the original city. But then the original city fans, the Guaratinguetá and Barueri, they were like, we don't care anymore. You left us. We don't give you a rat's ass. And then they decline, and then those both teams who did that don't exist anymore. They don't play anymore.
Yeah. You should never. It's like it's a core tenet of business. Never abandon your core clientele, and that's what you do when you move from your original city. That's where you've built your fan base, and because the Rams were fortunate that they were already in LA. They had a ton of Rams fans there to begin with, so it wasn't a hard decision to move back to LA, outside of just screwing over St. Louis. Which was really unfortunate, and really kind of a backside. We consider that Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Rams, is from Missouri, so kind of screwed over his own state. The Chargers, though, I still don't understand to this day why they moved. It was a bad decision. They had a good fan base in San Diego. I understand the stadium situation wasn't the best, but sometimes playing in the best stadium is worse than playing in front of none of your fans at all. And those fans, obviously, in those situations, were justified to move on, whether to not watch NFL at all or to move on to a new team. And because the teams also have to be loyal to you in terms of actually staying where they are, providing you with the best experience possible. Because like Tennessee, for like the Vols, I know they're renovating Neyland right now, and some people are upset over them removing the bathroom troughs and stuff. Legendary features of the stadium. But to me, not updating the stadium would be disloyal to the fan base, because you want to provide them with the best game day experience possible. So it'll be interesting to see. We'll definitely have to come back to this topic some more in the future, but I kind of want to segue this into what's been going on in college football, because that's kind of the whole reason why I brought up loyalty this week. And I want to break down Lincoln Riley to USC and Brian Kelly to LSU. Well, let's start with Lincoln Riley. Of course, he was the coach at Oklahoma. 55-10 there. I believe he won 4 conference championships, been to the playoffs 3 times, didn't win a single time. Came close in 2017 against Georgia. They lost that game 54-40 in overtime in the Rose Bowl. Then proceeded to get blown out by Alabama. It was 35-34. And LSU 63-28. Didn't have a chance in either one of those games. You say what you will, Oklahoma this year was disappointing. I thought they would be the national champions. I picked them preseason to win a national championship. They didn't. They never looked like they were fully together. Spencer Rattler was preseason Heisman favorite. He gets benched in the Texas game for Caleb Williams, brings it back against the Longhorns, who we've come to find out are terrible themselves. And after a 10-2 season, losses to Baylor and Oklahoma State, they didn't make the Big 12 title game. Their season's over. They're not making a big-time bowl game. They're not making the playoffs. So, Lincoln Riley, the day after his team's final game, decides to go to USC, the University of Southern California, for reportedly up to $120 million and all kinds of other benefits, like a free private jet. USC will buy him a home. All kinds of crazy stuff. So first and foremost, from a football perspective, I'll let you go first, Gus. What was your general thoughts about this move?
I think it was the necessary move for the USC Trojans to stay relevant, because after Pete Carroll left, they haven't been any relevant. They haven't even came close to a national championship, and they weren't coach after coach to Steve Sarkisian, to Clay Helton, to other coaches who weren't successful. So they needed to bring a coach who are going to change the perspective, who are going to bring a different kind of mentality. So I think Lincoln Riley wasn't necessary. And I think the Pac-12 conference needed that, because think about it. Oregon was the only one who came close to in the playoff contention, and they were just blown out, and were eliminated. So again, the Pac-12 really needs the USC to be relevant, to be good, so they can be relevant again. Because they're gonna make 5 straight years without a team in the semifinals. Even now, the
Yeah.
ASC is gonna make it. Looks like it.
Yeah. So, because here's the thing to really consider when it comes to LA, and I heard Colin Cowherd, who lives in LA, really is a huge proponent of LA because I know a lot of people nationally tear LA down these days for multitudes of reasons, including homelessness or politics, stuff like that. Um, but LA, from a sports perspective, is very crowded. You have two football teams now. You have the Rams and the Chargers. You have the Lakers and the Clippers, who are both um, successful teams. You have the Dodgers and the Angels. Yeah, the Angels may not be very good, but you still have Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout, some big stars there. You have the Los Angeles Kings and the Anaheim Ducks. This is a lot of competition. Most college teams don't have that competition. Tennessee doesn't have any competition in Knoxville. Alabama doesn't have any competition in Tuscaloosa. Oklahoma only has the Thunder to really compete with, and the Thunder right now aren't very good. USC, you have a lot of competition. In the mid 2000s, you didn't have either one of the NFL teams there when USC was the dynasty that it was.
Yeah, because
And
when you think about it, when USC was the big dynasty, the Lakers and the Lakers were in the rebuilding mode. The Clippers were a joke. The Dodgers and the I think was still the Anaheim um,
Angels.
the Angels. They were not relevant in baseball, so they were the brand in sports. But now everything now is different. Even the Angels are relevant, having Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout. The Dodgers,
Right.
won a World Series last season, and
Yeah,
Lakers won also.
All right, finish that point.
No, I say the Lakers won a title. The Clippers have a good team, so you need to go big because like unproven coaches and USC does not cut it anymore. A USC got to go big or stay irrelevant.
Yeah, but I think it's just really beyond the USC because I've heard people bring this up too. Just as you said, the Pac-12 in general is irrelevant. I mean, the only team that's been relevant in the Pac-12 is Oregon, and Oregon just is never going to have the talent on their team like USC does. I mean, I know Oregon has good talent, and I know they beat Ohio State earlier this year, but consistently, I don't trust Oregon to be a national championship contender. And there's really no one else in the West Coast I do either. I mean, the number of schools out in the West, you got USC, you've got Oregon. I think Washington, with the right coach, can be nationally relevant, and they made the playoffs back in 2015. A team like BYU, I think, is going to be consistently really, really good, especially when they get to the Big 12. Utah's decent. Arizona State, to me, can be really, really good with the right hire. But outside of those schools, I don't think Stanford can be consistent because their academic requirements. Same thing goes for California, Berkeley. UCLA, to me, is more of a basketball school. So I don't really see them ever being great in football.
Even with Chip Kelly?
No, I mean, I think this year is about as good as you're going to see under Chip Kelly. They're 8-4. They kind of gave away some games. I don't see them topping what they did this year. I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. I could be wrong on that, but I don't have long-term high hopes for UCLA because their eggs are not all in the football basket. And I think for the West Coast in general, the eggs are just not in football. Like, football is not the number one priority at a lot of West Coast schools compared to what it is in the SEC and the Big Ten. USC is the only school out here that could fit in to the South or Midwest in terms of the way they approach football. Because historically, they are one of the most successful brands in football. They should always be one of the most successful brands in football because they don't have a lot of competition on the West Coast. And California produces a lot of great talent that isn't staying in California. And you do have to wonder if NIL, does that change the tide a little bit? Because let's be honest, it's very, very expensive in California. Like, Lincoln Riley can afford it. But I feel like what people aren't discussing is for student athletes. How much can they really afford? Because I know you have full ride scholarships. But with the NIL deals and the way taxes work, how much more feasible is California versus going to the SEC in Texas or in, Georgia or any other state where the taxes are lower? And It's kind of commonplace now to see California kids go to the East Coast to play football. So it's really, really interesting to think about the task that's ahead of Lincoln Riley, because his number one task is to lock down California, because he can form a championship winning team within the city of Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles metro, and that whole general area of California. Like, you can field some damn good teams, filled with just California kids. But how do you repel Alabama? How do you repel Clemson and Ohio State and the rest of these teams that are coming out west to take all those recruits? That's a challenge he's going to have to face. And eventually, he's going to have to prove it on the field, which, let's be honest, he never did at Oklahoma. You weren't able to win a playoff game. And that, to me, is the long-term question about Lincoln Riley. Can he win a national championship? I don't know. He'll win a ton of Pac-12 championships. He'll be in the playoffs, especially when it expands to 12, 8, or 12 teams eventually, whenever that is. But when he plays SEC teams, I just have a feeling there might be 3 to 4 SEC teams every single year that are going to be better than USC, and that's going to be a problem for Lincoln Riley. What are your thoughts about that, Gus? I think we've lost him. Yeah, so just trying to think if there are any other thoughts that I personally had on Lincoln Riley.
I mean, I think Lincoln Riley wants to have a chance to be in a bigger school, and he might make that move because he doesn't want to play in the SEC, because I think he wants to still be in a conference that he can dominate, because Oklahoma agreed to be in the SEC. Maybe Lincoln Riley wasn't a big fan of it. So
Yeah,
if and
I
it,
believe
you
so
know,
too.
go back to our original point, original like opening topic, like Lincoln Riley was loyal to Oklahoma. Oklahoma wasn't loyal maybe to what Lincoln Riley came. They changed conferences without talking to the coach. So if Oklahoma can change conferences, why Lincoln Riley cannot change team?
That's a very good point. And to me, I'm not mad at Lincoln Riley. Obviously, I'm not an Oklahoma fan, so I don't have any emotional attachment. Because I would have done the exact same thing if I were offered the things that he was offered, and you have an easier road every year to the playoffs. Obviously, from Oklahoma's perspective, he's as much of a snake now as Kevin Durant. Two of those people's eyes. Like, I mean, just imagine being from Oklahoma. You have these superstar players and superstar coaches, but they all keep on leaving you. That's just a rough pill to swallow, I think, for the people of Oklahoma. And which is pretty surprising, too, because Oklahoma is one of the blue blood jobs of college football. It's one of the best jobs out there. But we do have to ask, with the move to the SEC, is it less desirable? Like, how desirable is it truly? Because the state of Oklahoma itself does not produce great talent. Over half of Oklahoma's roster is from Texas. I believe it was like 48 out of 85 players are from the state of Texas on the current roster. And I believe I personally counted that the other day. You're going to a conference where you're not going to have to compete with Texas, but you're competing now with Texas A&M, and the rest of the SEC now is setting up shop in Texas. Everyone goes to Texas now to get players from all across the SEC. I think that doesn't benefit Oklahoma at all. Like, Oklahoma, to me, is in danger of falling off a bit, because they're not going to have an easy road every single year. I mean, if you were struggling every year with a team like Kansas State and struggling with Iowa State, how are you going to beat Alabama and Georgia and Auburn and Texas A&M every single year? And the same goes for Texas. I mean, Texas can't even beat Kansas on a consistent basis. How are they going to compete in the SEC?
Yeah, and Texas lost to, I think, the last two games they played with SEC teams, LSU and Arkansas.
Right now, Oklahoma, they have a 3-4 game. Probably the last SEC team they've beat is probably Tennessee. If I can remember off the top of my head. Of course, they shouldn't have even won that game, but Tennessee kind of let them win that game. But nevertheless, I don't really want to dredge up that old memory again. But Riley with him and the coach. Go ahead.
But in terms of the new coach for Oklahoma Sooners, what direction should they go? Luke Fickell or Campbell? there's really some interesting
I mean, there's a lot of rumors about Brent Venables, the Clemson defensive coordinator, which I think that would be a solid hire. But for Oklahoma, you would think they'd be able to get a head coach. I mean, Luke Fickell probably is your number one call. I think Lane Kiffin, I would call him. I think he would do a really good job at Oklahoma. But if you're Lane Kiffin, do you leave Ole Miss for Oklahoma? I personally would. I don't know if he would agree, because I think Lane Kiffin, as an older coach, because he did this before, he left Tennessee for USC, and I would imagine deep down some part of him regrets it.
But he left because he had a connection to the school. I don't think he's going to leave Ole Miss because he knows Ole Miss has a more viable chance to be a better team than Oklahoma, especially in the SEC. Like Oklahoma's going to have a hard time adjusting. Ole Miss,
Mississippi is an underrated state of talent.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what location, for example, he will go. I think Florida is the best fit because he already has successful as FAU. So I believe Lane Kiffin would rather go to like a Gators than the Sooners.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I actually forgot to put that in the lineup. I'll discuss him too. Billy Napier to Florida. That's an interesting hire on its own. Of course, maybe Miami will be opening, but Miami has not fired Manny Diaz, so they may not be firing Manny Diaz, which is interesting to think about, because I don't know if they should. I think they showed a lot of progress towards the back half of the year. They finally found a quarterback, the Van Dyke. I can't remember. I think it's Philip Van Dyke. He looked pretty good. I know they made a bowl game, so maybe you ride out one more year of Manny Diaz, because Miami to me is like Tennessee. You have to give a coach some time, because Miami is just not in the right place. And really, historically, Miami's not a great program. Outside of the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, they did nothing before 1984 as a program, and they've done nothing since 2001. So, I mean, they haven't won the ACC since they joined it in 2004. And the ACC has had some really bad seasons, including this season. The ACC is not very good. When your best two teams are Wake Forest and Pittsburgh, it's a sign that your conference isn't very strong. No disrespect to those two teams. They're having amazing seasons. But it's just a sign how the rest of the conference is really
and what is crazy about Nick, how different the ACC title from last year is going to be compared to this year. Last year was literally a spot for the national championship, like playoff. This year, maybe just for the title itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, the winner will go to a New Year's Six Bowl. The loser won't. So that's kind of the only thing on it. I mean, I'd love to see Wake Forest get it, because that school, I mean, they never get a season like this, so it'd be awesome. Of course, I think that'll be a great game. It'll be a high-scoring game. I probably would go Pittsburgh, though. I think they'll win it. But yeah, kind of since you already brought it up, let's kind of just bring up Florida real quick. Billy Napier, the coach from Louisiana, Lafayette, he was, I believe, 39-12 over the last 4 years. Louisiana Lafayette, the free season before he arrived, had not had a winning season. But every single year he's been there, they've won a division. Now, he hasn't won a conference title yet, but he has a chance to do that on Saturday against Appalachian State. He's young. He's actually right down the road from me. He's from Chatsworth, Georgia. I know some of the local news stations here in Chattanooga have been doing some stories about his brother, who coaches at Murray County High School, right down the road from where I'm at here in Tennessee. It's a wild card hire. When you hire one of these guys from a lower tier program, you just don't know what you're going to get.
Kind of like Derek Dooley in Tennessee. Do you compare this hire? Kind of like Derek Dooley.
Billy Napier to me is a lot better than that. He's kind of more like a Gus Malzahn to Auburn to me, because Gus Malzahn did really well at Arkansas State. Had a lot of positivity around his name. And Napier, he worked under Saban. He's worked at a couple of SEC schools. He is known as a relentless recruiter and is very energetic. That's what Florida needs. Florida needs a recruiter, because Dan Mullen was not a good recruiter. He was a great coach, and I still think he's a really good X's and O's coach. But he's not good at recruiting, and you can see that by the end of his tenure, the talent just had dropped at Florida. And Florida has no excuse to not be a top-tier school in recruiting. So Billy Napier, I think, has the potential to do that. Now, can he coach well enough in the SEC to beat the Georgias? Of course, obviously, Florida beats Tennessee every year anyway, so he just needs to maintain that. So hopefully Josh Heupel will be able to beat Billy Napier. But we'll have to wait and see what they're able to do. That's an interesting hire. I don't know how good they're going to be in the long run. But the real shocker, well, obviously outside of Lincoln Riley at USC, which was a shocker, but Brian Kelly, Notre Dame's head coach, has been there for over a decade, the winningest coach in Notre Dame history, decides to leave Touchdown Jesus to head down to the Bayou to coach LSU after they fired Ed Orgeron 2 years removed from a national title. I don't know about this. I'm not a fan of this move because Brian Kelly's a good coach. Now, maybe not a good person. There's a lot of evidence off the field. I mean, of course, he let a student die in an accident, quote unquote, because the student was on a forklift during a windstorm that he shouldn't have been on, filming football practice, and unfortunately, it tipped over and it killed the student. There's other stories. I saw a story about Robert Salah, and I can't remember who the other coach was. But it was two coaches that are now big-time head coaches themselves who were GAs under Brian Kelly. They thought they were invited to a party by Brian Kelly. They show up, and they have to shovel snow for the entire time. And then informing his players that he's leaving Notre Dame by text. And he probably did the same thing to his Cincinnati players when he left for Notre Dame. And shows up this morning, gives a 4-minute speech, and is out of there. But out of town before even the players leave the football building. Safe to say, I'm not a fan of Brian Kelly as a person, but as a football coach, he's pretty good. But the same thing goes for him like Lincoln Riley. Can't win in the postseason. Now, a lot of that to me is Notre Dame. They don't have the same quality of athlete like SEC teams. They do have some academic restrictions, and I think playing as an independent does hurt them somewhat. And that's why Notre Dame should join a conference. It'd be better for them if they were in the ACC.
I mean, they did last year. They basically did last year. They
Yeah.
ran ACC.
Exactly. I mean, they have very good players at Notre Dame, but LSU does have better players. My concern about Brian Kelly is cultural. Ed Orgeron was the Louisiana man. He was from Louisiana. He sounds like a Cajun. He really energized that fan base.
And he won a national title.
Yeah. I don't think Brian Kelly's going to be able to do that. And at LSU, if you're not beating Alabama consistently, if you're not beating Auburn consistently, I don't see how, unless he's go down there and just wins a ton of games, how Brian Kelly is going to be that successful.
I mean, he wanted to be in a team that needs a big star. Like LSU needed Brian Kelly as much Brian Kelly needed LSU, because let's face it, Ed Orgeron was a great accident because he was an interim head coach, was losing game, but then LSU decided to keep it. Of course, he won a national title, but LSU needs to make a big splash higher because, even though they won a national title, the last 2 seasons has been very mediocre. But at the same time, Brian Kelly wanted to join LSU because he wanted to play in the SEC. He wanted to recruit in the SEC, which will give him more leverage to find players that can play for him without any restrictions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a recruiting standpoint, they're going to be really, really good. And Notre Dame was recruiting really well by the end of his tenure there. I believe they had the 5th ranked recruiting class up until the time he left. So they were going to have some really good teams at Notre Dame, and they're now going to LSU. I just think it's going to be really difficult for any coach to really succeed in that job, because if a coach can get fired 2 years after winning a national championship in LSU, then not winning a national championship is going to get you fired even faster at that job. I don't understand there's some off the field stuff that probably got Ed Orgeron fired too, but I just think this is not a good cultural fit, and I think it's going to blow up in their face. Now, I could be completely wrong. He could go down there and win 2 to 3 national titles. I wouldn't be completely shocked with that either, but I don't know. I'll be curious to see how much the LSU fan base really gets behind Brian Kelly in this offseason. And I guess kind of the last piece of this puzzle is, who should Notre Dame go and get? Because Notre Dame, it is probably the premier college job, one of the most premier college jobs, at least. It has that aura around it. It's Notre Dame. It's Rudy. It's touchdown Jesus. Honestly, the first thought I had was Urban Meyer. Not doing well in Jacksonville. Notre Dame is his dream job. He said it on multiple occasions. Of course, he came out and said that he's not looking at any college jobs. But if we've learned anything about this coaching search and any coaching search, is you never trust what a coach says. Ever. Never trust coaches. And and especially Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer is one of the least trustworthy coaches. I could do a whole segment on the stuff Urban Meyer has done throughout his career, but I won't waste all times with that. What do you think that if Urban Meyer got offered Notre Dame job, that he would ditch the NFL to go to South Bend?
No, I don't think so. Because Urban Meyer is definitely want to be in a place that he can rule. He can, he had done some questionable decisions in terms of recruiting and off the field. So if Notre Dame is just as strict academically and in morality, I don't think Urban Meyer. I think Urban Meyer can be a good Oklahoma, Sooners candidate because I think Oklahoma is this close to win a national title. And who's a coach who won it before? Urban Meyer.
Urban Meyer was a national title coach.
So
But I think the problem is though he doesn't want to go back to the SEC. I mean that's the reason why he left Florida. When he lost Tim Tebow, he wasn't good anymore in the SEC.
yeah,
So
that's a good point. Yeah.
yeah,
Like whoever Oklahoma hires now need to be proven success in the SEC. I think Oklahoma has a chance right now to hire a coach who has experience in the SEC because now they're timing for the transition.
it's really fortunate that our coach Josh Heupel at Tennessee is on bad terms with Oklahoma because obviously he'd otherwise be a perfect hire for Oklahoma. In terms of being a former national championship winning coach and just being that sports legend in Oklahoma. And now he's proven that he is a really good coach of his own right. Yeah, making Tennessee watchable again. Like I saw Tennessee tweeted out the other day. I think we scored 18 points more per game this year, and just the stats changes on offense are unbelievable. And just it, and I mean this was the most fun year of Tennessee ball football in 5 years. So obviously, I really don't want to lose Josh Heupel, and I'm not really worried that we're going to at least to Oklahoma because of the past. And Bob Stoops is still involved at Oklahoma because he's going to be their interim. So I really don't think there's any chance that Josh Heupel leaves. I'll be very upset if that does happen because I think he can be a really good coach for us here at Tennessee. But otherwise, I think some of the other names at Notre Dame, they're saying Marcus Freeman, the defensive corner. He's only 35. He's never been a head coach. Could be a guy. And then Luke Fickell again. But I think Luke Fickell, Notre Dame would make more sense for him because he is a Midwest guy. And he's a powerhouse. But the thing about it is, if you're Luke Fickell, you have a chance to win a national championship right now with Cincinnati. So I don't think you can really be thinking about going to another job. Now, that's the other problem, though, with Brian Kelly. If things go a certain way this weekend during championship weekend, Notre Dame might be in the playoffs without a head coach.
That would be insane.
Yeah, and I know the college football playoff committee came out and said that they're going to put that into consideration. Where I just think it's absolutely unacceptable and unfair. Like, you cannot punish a whole football team because their head coach decided to go take another job. It's because, like think about this theoretical scenario. What if a coach were to die? Like you're in the playoff hunt, you're on the bubble, your coach dies unexpectedly, and the playoff committee is like, well, you don't have a coach, so we're going to keep you out of the playoffs. Like that would be so unfair. Like, yeah, if they're a little bit worse in the field, yeah, keep them out. But don't factor stuff like that into your decision making. This is why having a 13-person playoff committee is the worst thing that's ever happened to the sport of college football. Yeah, and I said that. This is killing the sport of college football because it's unfair, and I'm really worried they're going to find a way to screw out Cincinnati.
Yeah, I agree because They're rooting really bad for Cincinnati to play a really tight game or even lose it versus Houston in the AAC, the American Conference Championship.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's fair because if you think about it, but that scenario to happen, Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State all have to lose to Notre Dame to get in, I believe, or maybe only two of those teams have to lose.
Yeah. I think for Notre Dame, they would need Cincy to lose. And I think you definitely need Bama to lose. Because if Bama wins, both Alabama and Georgia are in. Then you need Michigan to lose probably to Iowa. And then you probably need Oklahoma State to lose to Baylor. But really only need two of those things to happen. Because let's say Alabama loses and then Cincy loses. I think it'd be both Oklahoma State and Notre Dame getting in. You get Cincy and Georgia lose. That'd be it'd be Georgia, Bama, Michigan, and probably Oklahoma State. So they need Bama to lose no matter what, and then you need one of Michigan, Cincy, or Oklahoma State to lose. And then there's the question of would an 11-2 Baylor get in over 11-1 Notre Dame? Because Baylor had to play in a conference title game versus Notre Dame not having to play in a conference title game. Like, what if Baylor comes out and blows out Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game? What if they win by like 30 points? Should 11-2 Baylor get that run at the title game? At the playoff?
Yeah, I mean, that's again the discussion that NCAA or the college football playoff committee have to fix it. You ended up being not rewarded by playing an extra game. So Notre Dame got to just sit there and wait the teams to fail so he can get in. So Notre Dame can get in.
And
So
also, the deliberate underranking of Houston. I mean, Houston's only 21. So they're gonna be like, oh, you only beat number 21 by 5 points. Not good enough for us.
And it was crazy that were past seasons that Houston were, ranked higher, but it did not have that much win. But it's going
right,
to be
like if you compare it to the AP, Houston's 16 in the AP poll. So that's how much the playoff committee is underranking Houston.
Yeah, at least the top four in both ranks are pretty much the same. So, but Cincinnati have to watch out because the committee really wants to put Oklahoma State or Notre Dame in. So Cincinnati have to play the game of their life to keep it into the college football playoff.
Yeah, so I'm rooting for Cincy. I want them to go in. I really want Bama to lose because I don't want to see them back in. Because if Bama loses, then we have a good shot of seeing 4 teams with no national titles between them in the playoff era. So that would be great for the sport to have a new team be a national title. Of course, it's probably going to be Georgia. I mean, Georgia by far is the best team this year. To me, the only way Georgia loses if they get behind early and have to depend on Stetson Bennett to win them a football game, because he hasn't had to really do that this year. So I don't know if you can though with how good that Georgia defense is,
and how cool it would have been finally Oklahoma State making to the playoffs and kicking Alabama out after the whole controversy in the 2011 BCS.
Yeah, it would be so ironic, and it would be such a good payback too. And we finally get to see what Mike Gundy's made out of on the big stage.
Yeah, I really want the scenario: Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State.
That would be Michigan too. Like, we haven't talked about that at all. Michigan beating Ohio State for the first time in 10 years. I mean, that was an awesome game. I found myself rooting for Michigan by the end of that one, just because to me, I see a lot of Tennessee in Michigan. I like Ohio State is their Alabama, and it gives me hope as a Tennessee fan. Like, if they can beat Ohio State, we can beat Alabama one day.
And it's so crazy. Last season, I remember how many times we talked on Rock Soul Sports. Oh, Jim Harbaugh, it's his time done. Is he going to get fired? Because let's remember, last season's Michigan was a disaster. Like, they didn't even play Ohio State in the last game. I know it was because of COVID, but even though they did not have that game, they had a 2-4 season. So they only won 2 games last season. Now they won 11. What a rebuild.
Right. And I think it goes to show that maybe you shouldn't just fire a coach for one bad season. Because I said this last week with Dan Mullen or 2 weeks ago that I feel like Florida was kind of silly for rushing to fire him. Because I know he had some off the field stuff with some of the comments he was making. He was kind of acting like an idiot. But overall, he has a really good record as coach, and he was doing really well until last year, or until this season. So I feel like we have, because coaches are human. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes. Sometimes they're going to have a series of game plans that don't work. And everyone's expecting every coach to be Nick Saban. Not every coach is Nick Saban. There's only one Nick Saban. And I think looking at Michigan, looking at Harbaugh, they kind of assessed the situation and realized there's no one better we're going to be able to get. We kind of need to ride out with Jim Harbaugh and see if he can finally get it done. And he finally got it done. And more schools should take a look at that, because there's too many schools that are ruining themselves by going after coach after coach after coach just because they're not getting their way for one season. I feel like LSU could eventually be a school like that. With some of the decisions they've been making. Because as I've said previously, I'm not a big fan of the Brian Kelly hire, and that's just my deal. I think in college football, it's become, because my dad and I have been talking about this. At a certain point, we're just going to run out of coaches. We can't have every coach just flying around. Then what's even the point anymore? Like, there's no sense of consistency.
Yeah, that's what happens in Brazil. Like, the market's so saturated that right now the coaches are successful. They're foreigners. I don't think America is going to import football coaches from the countries, but in Brazil, the soccer teams are going to, the last two successful coaches in Brazil were from Portugal, Jorge Jesus and Abel Ferreira. So Brazil needed to import coaches from Europe to, get some success. Of course, other coaches from like Europe failed, but the last 3 Libertadores were won by
Yeah, I think we just briefly lost Gus there, but I'll definitely I'll let him finish this thought there when he comes back. But just kind of wrapping it up, I'll just kind of give some of my picks for this weekend. I like Georgia over Bama. I think this finally the Dogs will get the Tide. I like Michigan over Iowa. I like Oklahoma State over Baylor. In the Pac-12, I like Oregon to get back out Utah, and I like Pittsburgh to beat Wake Forest in the ACC title. So both picks. I like Cincinnati to beat Houston by a comfortable margin of 2 to 3 touchdowns. And I like Louisiana to finally beat Appalachian State in the Sun Belt title. I believe there's also the MAC title. I don't know who's playing in that off the top of my head. I believe Kent State's one of the teams. And it's Kent State and Northern Illinois. I don't know. I haven't really watched either one of those teams. I guess I'll root for Kent State. Why not? I don't think I know Northern Illinois typically has a decent football program. I'll root for Kent State to win that game. All right, so I'll just move on to the next American topic. When Gus gets back in, I'll let him finish his point. Baseball. Some free agency signings are happening. Of course, we got Max Scherzer going from the Nationals to the New York Mets. The Mets are trying once again to buy their way into a title. Didn't work for them last year. We'll see if they can finally do it this year. Certainly the pressure's on after 2 of their division adversaries have won titles in the last 3 years, the Washington Nationals and my Atlanta Braves. Corey Seager going from the Los Angeles Dodgers, the probably most talented team in baseball, to the Texas Rangers, who are not, by any stretch of the imagination, the most talented team in baseball. Interesting decision there. Obviously, no money. All right. Hey, go back and finish your take on the coaches coming in from Portugal to Brazil.
No, that's what I was gonna finish the topic. Is like, coaching market. It's so crazy, the trends that happen. Like in Brazil, for a while it was new generation. Now is coaches coming from Europe. I don't know what's gonna happen in 3 or 4 years, but now the trend in America is this coaching carousel of one big school to the other, and then it's going to be assistant coaches. Now I think even one trend that was big and now is not there anymore is Nick Saban's assistant, because like Steve Sarkisian in Texas, the last assistant that was hired is not very successful.
Right. And I think this year what you're going to see is Brill O'Brien and Pete Golden are the two coordinators. I don't think either one of them are going to get a job, head coaching up, because Bill O'Brien was rumored for, I think, Virginia Tech, but they went with Penn State's DC, Brent Pry, for their head coach opening. So the South Nick Saban halfway house might be coming to a close just because you're not always going to have quality coaches every single time coming through the Nick Saban halfway house. But I'd moved on to baseball. I talked about Scherzer to the Mets. I know you want to talk about that, your favorite team, because basically what I said is the Mets are trying to buy their way into another title. Are they going to finally be able to do it? And I feel like the pressure is really growing up there because you've seen two of your division rivals in the Nationals and Braves win titles in the last 3 years.
And now they got a new owner, Steve.
Steve Cohen.
They got a new Steve Cohen. So when you have a new owner, the new owner wants to prove that he can be successful. Of course, last season they already on a like acquiring new players like Javi Baez and Francisco Lindor. So now getting Mark Scherzer, who has experience in the National League, who were successful in the Nats. Now I think it's going to be good add up to the Mets because the Mets just lost Noah Syndergaard. So they need to get that big acquisition, that ace for the roster.
Right, because you already have God, why am I blanking on his name? Like your number one ace, who is just unbelievable.
Jacob Degrom.
Degrom. There you go. I don't know why I can't remember his name. I'm not.
I remember.
Yeah, Jacob Degrom. I mean, obviously he's incredible, and it's really kind of a shame because he's kind of wasting his career up there. They're not. I mean, he barely gets run support. I mean, the other guys aren't holding their end of the deal in the weight. So, yeah, the Mets certainly have a long way to go in order to get back to title contention. But as we've seen, all it takes is getting the right group of guys to get hot, and anyone can win in baseball. We saw what happened to the Braves. On paper, the Braves have been knocked out in the first round. They got all the way to win the World Series. Of course, I mentioned Corey Seager going to the Rangers. I just think it's going to kind of waste away now in Texas because they got a long way to go there in order to get back to a title contention in Texas. But Chris Bryant, Chris Correa, and Freddie Freeman all being unsigned, especially Freddie Freeman. I know he's asking for a really big deal. He's getting older. Part of me thinks it might be wiser to let him walk just because you want to rebuild with younger talent. You've got the ring with him. There's no reason to sacrifice the future for a massive contract like that. But at the same time, though, from a sentimental perspective, I want us to hold on to Freeman, let him retire in Atlanta because he's meant so much to the Atlanta Braves. And it almost calls back.
Yeah, he meant a lot.
Yeah, in terms of how loyal should the Braves be to Freeman.
Yeah, Freddie Freeman was the face of the title, was the face of franchise for the past, 5 years?
10
years? 10 years. So, but again, it's going to depend on the agreement. And it's going to be funny because I don't think this agreement is going to come soon because my next topic is going to talk about the situation about the collective bargaining agreement that can even halt those negotiations.
Right. And this is something that's existential. And that's the reason why I was really glad when the Braves won it. Because I knew that maybe next year we may not have baseball. So, what's the latest on the CBA?
I mean, the latest is that Major League Baseball is likely headed to this first lockout since 1995 after today's negotiations with the union abruptly ended hours before the expiration of the collective bargaining agreement at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. MLB, of course, expected to implement a lockout Thursday with no further meetings scheduled. And New York Mets new pitcher, Mark Scherzer, says the lockout seems like a very likely scenario because, I mean, he's a union's executive member. So, he has a big influence. And the two sides met for 15 minutes today in the morning, and Deputy Commissioner Dan Holland, General Counsel Patrick Houlihan, and Colorado's Rockies owner Dick Manford were all representing Major League Baseball. but they couldn't get it done. So the lockout, I think, is gonna come soon because an MLB owner should meet on Wednesday afternoon to likely vote the lockout, which frees all baseball activities until the CBA's reach. So who got those deals got it, and who didn't is gonna have to wait.
Yeah, and that would set back the entire sport, I think, because the sport's already been through a lot. I mean, no sport got hit harder by the pandemic to me than baseball, because minor league teams lost a whole season. Baseball teams lost, a whole season of fans in the major league teams, and Major League Baseball relies so much on the in-stadium revenue, like more so than any other sport in the fan experience. Because a lot of people don't like watching baseball anymore on television. It's slow paced, but they love going to a baseball game. They love the experience with the Cracker Jacks, all that. But a lot of people, I feel like, are already disillusioned with baseball, just for a lot of different reasons. And having another CBA lockout on top of everything else that's happened really is going to kill off, I think, a lot of love for it in this country. They can't afford to go an entire season next year without baseball. Not when you have the NFL just ruling the roost. I mean, do you know how many viewers watched Raiders Cowboys on Thanksgiving? It was 38.5 million. That's the most ever for a Thanksgiving NFL game. Football is king right now. Baseball is no longer the American pastime. And I really would hate to see baseball go the way of boxing, because I don't want to see it go the way of boxing. But they're in danger, I feel like, of going that direction if there's a lockout.
I mean, the last lockout literally made Major League Baseball did not have a season. They don't have a 1995 World Series. As bad the NFL is, when they had a problem like that, they played with reserves. They managed to have a season. The NFL has uninterrupted champions since the 60s. So Major League Baseball, of course, fans are scared because, oh my God, the last lockout we didn't have a season. Should this lockout affect you?
Yeah.
Maybe not, because I think.
And I really think about that lockout kind of took baseball, because baseball before 1990 was the sport in America, but it's no longer, because the NFL was kind of on the upswing at that time, and it really just kind of took over without competition. And I think about like Montreal, for example. If the Expos might have won it all that year, because they had a great team in 1994, but we never got to see that team win it all. And I think if they had won it all, we would have never had the Washington Nationals. So I feel like we're going to see a similar situation occur if there's a full-on lockout in 2022.
I mean, probably not. I mean, maybe Tampa Bay. Maybe Tampa Bay, because Tampa Bay has a good team, but has not won it all, and they're considering moving to Montreal. How ironic is that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It would be an incredibly ironic thing. I think Tampa Bay is going to be the Rays aren't going to be there for much longer, regardless of what happens. But this will definitely speed it up.
Yeah, definitely. And baseball is in a process right now of being the America's pastime.
Absolutely. All right. Do you want to move on to some of your Brazilian topics? Because I know there's
Of
a massive
course.
game there, Palmeiras and Flamengo.
Yeah, congratulations to Sociedade Esportiva Palmeiras, third Libertadores championship, second consecutive, 1999, 2020, 2021. The game was very competitive. Palmeiras opening the score at 6 minutes with Rafael Veiga. Then Flamengo kind of took over in the second half, tied the game with Gabriel Barbosa. And then in the overtime, the unlikely hero, Daverson, who has been hated by Palmeiras fans. Hated. I remember one game that I covered Palmeiras. He lost a ton of goals. He, is not a good, striker, but he was on the right place in the right time. He stole the ball from Andreas Pereira, and then he, that's the guy. That's the play. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I just had the highlights up here because I hadn't seen them. But yeah, it was a really nice. The winning goal was really nice.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the winning goal. Daverson's the blonde one. So he was kind of like the unlikely hero. Palmeiras have some like unlikely heroes, but this one's the biggest, because nobody, if asked like 100 Palmeiras fans, nobody will say Daverson would be the the hero. But congratulations also to Abel Ferreira, who came mid-season to Palmeiras, won second consecutive Libertadores. No coach ever did that in Palmeiras. Only Tele Santana did that in Sao Paulo State with Sao Paulo's football club in the 1992-1993 seasons. But the other side, Flamengo, definitely hit really hard with that loss. Everybody was counting Flamengo to win. I was in Rio de Janeiro. Fans were disillusioned. They were angry. I was watching the game in a bar and I was making a video about the game, and I was not even rooting for Palmeiras. I was just watching the game, and fans were angry because they knew that game, if they lost, it wouldn't jeopardize the whole season because they haven't won any title, only the state title, which is minuscule compared to the power of Flamengo have financially. Flamengo expected to win it all, to win the Brazilian Championship, Brazilian Cup, Libertadores, compete in the FIFA Club World Cup, and now they're not going to have any of that. And of course, they fired Renato Gaúcho. I think I would not fire him because he hadn't had the time to adapt. I think if he give another season, he could have done better. But the fans were done with him. The media was done with him. The Rio de Janeiro media, and Flamengo, I think, is going to rebuilding mode next year. A lot of those players who played in the final were played in the 2019 Libertadores final when they won, but they're not the same fitness anymore. They're not the same players. They're older. There are a lot of injuries. So Flamengo's going to go not into like a rebuild where they're going to go probably in the top under the top 10. I think they're still going to be a good team. They're still going to fight for championships. But the era of Flamengo with this incredible team, it's done. They're going to have I don't know what the new coach is going to be because again, they ran out of coaches. Renato Gaúcho was the coach they always wanted to hire, and they ran out of town. And I don't see in the horizon any coach that Flamengo would consider. Or maybe only George Jesus, which was Flamengo's coach in 2019, 2020, and won it all. Won the Brazilian Championship, won the Libertadores, took Flamengo to the FIFA World Cup, FIFA Club World Cup final. He is in Benfica in Portugal, but Benfica is in a crisis. The general manager, the president of the team does not like him. He might come back to Flamengo. I think Flamengo will make a huge mistake because they're going to have probably the expectations and disappointment. And I think Jorge Jesus, I know the fans would have loved the idea of having him back because it will bring all the memories, all the moments and all the excitement back. But I think would not be a good hire. I think Flamengo needs to renovate, start new, and start to renovating the coaching staff and all the players as well. And finalizing Brazilian topics, Grêmio, which won the Libertadores 4 years ago, has one of the best rosters on paper, is very close to be relegated to the second division. Nobody, not a single sports journalist in Brazil would have said that at the beginning of the season. Everybody will say, oh, Grêmio is going to fight for the Brazilian title. Grêmio has a really good roster filled with international players that have been successful in Europe, like Rafinha, Douglas Costa, players who have been successful in Grêmio for years, like Kahneman or Jeromel. But this roster didn't click, especially with a very tough transition from Renato Gaúcho, who has been their coach for 5 years. And they, had 5 coaches throughout the season, like Renato Gaúcho, Thiago Costa, Felipao, interim head coach, and then Wagner Mancini. Thiago Nunes, by the way. So I'm really surprised Grêmio getting relegated. It's still a shock. And I think they're going to get promoted right back next season because they're still a viable team. But it's a very scary trend. Another season that a Power 12 team is going to get relegated. Last season was Vasco. 2019 was Cruzeiro. So a lot of the Power 12, which is the 12 biggest teams in Brazil, are getting tougher competition.
Yeah, and that can't be good for ratings either. I mean, to have your
No,
clubs, it'd be like
no.
Chelsea getting relegated or something.
Yeah. I compare more to like Everton or or like West Ham, but those still big ratings. Those are still really big teams in the country. So I think it's very surprising. Big for me, the biggest surprise of sports this year in general, throughout the whole world, is Grêmio getting relegated. Because if you see the team on paper, is a great team with players who have been successful internationally, players have experience, players that have been playing good recently, like in the previous club. The team did a good season last season. They went to the Brazilian Cup final. They went to the semifinal Libertadores, but they just couldn't keep up. So it's still a shock to me, you know, if they don't win on tomorrow against São Paulo, and I think Bahia needs to win Atlético Mineiro, they were relegated before the matchup versus Corinthians on Sunday.
Yeah, that's going to be really, sounds like a really, really desperate situation, because I know avoiding relegation means just as much as winning a title, especially for a team like that who doesn't expect to be relegated. Um, and definitely that Palmeiras Flamingo game, I obviously didn't see the game as a whole. I just saw the highlights, but it seemed like it was a very highly played game, in terms of tactics, and the goals to me were really impressive, like the movements and some of just the one-on-one goals. The way that they were able to outduel the goalkeepers were very.
Yeah, and you talk about tactics. Abel Ferreira really was smart. He changed the lineup unexpectedly. He had a plan, and he made this plan very careful. It was to play in counterattack, score first, let Flamengo run. They ended up scoring a goal. I think Weverton kind of, I think he could have catch that ball, but but by overtime, Flamengo was tired because they had to run all second half to score, and then Palmeiras took that opportunity, because if you see the second goal was a player missing the ball, probably because of the
I saw
fatigue.
that. And, I mean, it was a terrible defensive play. Like, you very rarely see a defensive blunder like that, just leaving on a one-on-one shot. It reminded me of
Yeah,
like a hockey play.
yeah, and you don't expect that in a big game like that. And because Palmeiras want Flamengo to get a lot of fatigue, being a lot of tired, because Flamengo throughout the whole season has dealing with injuries and fatigue. So Palmeiras plan worked, and they deserve to be the champions. I Even though I'm Corinthians fan, I hope they win the FIFA Club World Cup, so finally the joke of Palmeiras don't have a world champion is over, because I think it's I don't know. I mean, I can see the appealing to the fans of mocking a rival when this is the only title that you have, all the three bigger rivals have, and you don't. But if Palmeiras win the title, then obviously they're gonna put to rest the last big joke in Brazil.
Yeah, when is that going to be, by the way, the Club World Cup?
It's gonna be February 2nd to February 14th.
Okay.
Just gonna give a big shout out to João Antonio Tomazeli, my dad. Dad, I'll talk to you soon. Just finalizing my podcast here. João Antonio Tomazeli, my great dad, also listening to the podcast. So
Yeah, it's hot take time, I feel like.
hot take. Go you first.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a lot about college football, so I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm going to go a little bit of a different path here. NASCAR. I talk about that every now and then. Big NASCAR guy. They're making some really interesting moves right now during this offseason that I think is really going to help their popularity, because one of the big mistakes NASCAR has made historically is getting away from their roots, getting away from short track racing, getting away from the South. If you look at the television ratings after Phoenix, the championship race, all of the highest rated markets are essentially in the Southeast, in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia. Those are the areas where NASCAR does really, really well. And they just this week, it was the Nashville Fairgrounds, which is in the middle of Nashville, literally about 2 miles south of downtown. So it's about a half-mile short track. The renovations to it were approved. It's going to be ran by Bristol Motor Speedway, and it's going to look really nice. It kind of reminds me of like a baseball stadium feel. Like they're going to renovate it. It's going to have new seating. They're going to repave the track. It's going to be a really, really cool race when it's able to be done. I think it'll be 2023 probably before they'll be able to race at the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway. A race like that in Nashville, which I think is a market that NASCAR really needs to hit hard. I think it's going to help bring the sport back. Of course, you're doing the race in the middle of the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. I really like that idea. And also in North Carolina, North Wilkesboro, one of the founding tracks of NASCAR, the state of North Carolina has approved, I believe, $20 million to repave that track and to build that back. And just really honing in on the tracks that made NASCAR popular in the first place will help the sport of NASCAR come back and be perhaps maybe not as popular as it once was. I mean, because I think the guys like Dale Earnhardt and Richard Petty, those are just really hard guys to replace in terms of personalities. But I do think in terms of the diversity of the tracks and the quality of the racing, as long as the next gen car is good as a race car, and that's yet to be seen. Of course, we're going to start seeing that here in a couple of in over 2 months when they start racing at Daytona and all the other tracks across the country. I really am excited for the future of NASCAR.
I hope that too. I mean, it was an awesome experience covering NASCAR last year. I was so amazed by all the excitement. So I hope that do happen. And finalizing, our podcast with my hot take from the Brazilian side, Silvinho, Corinthians head coach. I kind of mentioned him during our today's episode. He's on a hot seat. Even though he won this weekend, fans want him out. And I don't think this should happen. I think he's doing a great job. Corinthians in the fourth place, only behind the three best teams in the country today: Palmeiras, Atlético Mineiro, and Flamengo. I think the team is playing the best it can get. I think next year, when they can have a true preseason with all their roster, with all the good players they acquire mid-season, I think the team's going to be even better. I think Silvinho can be trusted. I will give him next year's opportunity. Of course, if he can make it into the knockout stage of Libertadores, or if he can make it to the semifinals of Paulista's championship, then it's another discussion. But I think he deserves a chance. I think he deserves to stay. I think he has Corinthians roots. He really understands the club. He took over Corinthians, and Corinthians was in a rebuild mode. Then Corinthians got really good players, and now he deserves to stay because he took over a way different roster he has today, and he's doing a great job. No Corinthians fan, especially after when Flamengo beat Corinthians 3-1, there could have been like 4 or 5 or 6 or 7-1 that day in July. If you say Corinthians fans, you're going to be in fourth place in Libertadores, everybody will laugh at you. You'll be like, no way with this roster. But Corinthians got good players, but Silvinho was able to make this good roster be competitive. So I think he should stay for next season. I think the fans are just being delusional.
Yeah, as I said earlier on, sometimes the coach you have is the best option that's available. So you just have to kind of stick. Sometimes you have to stick with what you do, and maybe you can be rewarded like Michigan was this past weekend. But with all that, thank you for watching the newest episode of Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports, episode 7. We'll be back next week, hopefully on Tuesday, but we'll just let you know because our schedules are hectic. They're busy, and we'll come on whenever we both are able to do it. But for Gus Tomazeli, go ahead.
I just say my Tuesday or Wednesday.
I'll be Tuesday or Wednesday, but you'll see us. Just so actually follow us on YouTube at Gus's channel, Gus Tomazeli's channel. Just hit that notification bell, and you'll know when we're on. So also follow
and
us.
Also follow we are on Spotify as well.
Yeah, Spotify too. If you can't catch our live show, you can listen to it after the fact. It stays up there forever, at least until Spotify doesn't exist anymore. Hopefully, y'all enjoyed your Spotify Wraps. Shout out to anyone who has our podcast in their Spotify Wraps. It might just be me who had it in our Spotify Wraps. But yeah, take care, everyone. We'll see you next week.